Hello, everyone. And thank you for attending this presentation. Thanks a lot as well to stackconf for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here to tell you more details about the work we've been doing at OpenNebula lately and how we're planning to connect our edge computing technology to GAIA-X. So those are my contact details. If you have any additional question afterwards, or if you want to send me a follow-up email, just feel free to contact me. I live in a small village in eastern Spain. It's called Xàbia. You might be familiar with the place. Actually, it's just a few hours away from Mallorca, so yeah, I guess not that far away from German territory, right? Okay, so some background information about OpenNebula. We are a European open source company. We are based in Madrid. We were born in 2008 as the first European open source infrastructure as a service solution. We feel especially proud of being an example of European innovation, and also really thankful to the European Commission for the support we've received from them over the years. We're also, in that sense, an example of European funding well invested. That's been helpful for us to develop new features and innovate as we move beyond the public cloud to the edge, as I'll explain in a second. We're also members of a number of open source initiatives, international initiatives like Linux Foundation, CNCF, and obviously also corporate members of the European Open Science Cloud and Day One members of GAIA-X. So for those of you who already know OpenNebula, as I mentioned, we come from the private cloud. So traditionally, OpenNebula has been a tool for organizations and companies to set up their own cloud on premises, so using the infrastructure resources they had on premises. So on top of those, they used to set up an environment in which they offer virtual machines and resources to different research groups or departments or teams within the company. Part of the work we've been doing since 2019 with the support from the European Commission, it's been expanding these capabilities. And some of that involves as well managing application containers now directly from OpenNebula, deploying and managing your Kubernetes clusters as well from OpenNebula, and moving beyond the data center. So now organizations using OpenNebula can actually provision resources from third-party providers, both on the public cloud and on the edge. Before I move on, I'm going to introduce Momo to you, which is my cat, which is actually now in a kind of sabotage mission. So say hello and goodbye. Goodbye. Okay, so so all these changes we've been doing, all this innovation has been guided by some principles we're trying to respect. We've been trying to implement during these years, which is helping our users to avoid vendor locking, both at the provider level, but also at the technology level. So even open source technologies can generate a vendor locking scenario if they're, we think, unnecessarily complex, for instance. So that's we always trying to make things as simple as possible, minimize complexity, making it simple for people to deploy the product, use it, maintain it, and also obviously as well for users. We try to build OpenNebula around this principle, and also about the principle of reducing the resources you need for the product, and also reducing the operational costs once you've deployed the solution on your premises. So in terms of the technologies we use and we support, so coming from the private cloud, we've been supporting obviously virtual machines, technologies like KVM, but also vSphere, for instance. So now we support vSphere 7 for people who want to keep their VMware infrastructure at the virtualization layer, and on top of that, deploy and create their own private cloud using OpenNebula. We also support Linux system containers, LXC, and the latest integration has been Firecracker. So Firecracker is a new virtualization technology, an open source one. It has been developed by AWS for some of their services, and it's been really handy for us because it's allowed us to deploy application containers, as I explain in a second, directly as micro VMs. So on top of these technologies, you can use other tools for managing your infrastructure, like Terraform or Ansible, and also, as I mentioned, Kubernetes or Docker. So what you end up having is an environment with a number of options and integrations with other technologies that comes with the native multi-tenancy, a self-service portal for your users, allows you to define a number of elasticity rules for different services and complex services you might want to deploy in your cloud, for these services to react to what's happening in real time with your infrastructure as well and the demand from your users. You can set up a high availability environment. You can federate resources from different locations and different data centers. We had a user, for instance, with around 200,000 cores across, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 12 data centers or 13 data centers all around the world. So quite a big infrastructure there. You can also provision, as I mentioned, resources from other providers, from external providers, create your multi-cloud environment, and on top of that, manage VMs and application containers, all from the same place. The way we manage containers is one of these main novelties. It's a quite nice, beautiful solution we got there, I think. It involves an integration with the Docker Hub marketplace now from OpenEbla. And then we are able now to run Docker images as Firecracker micro VMs, so in a one-to-one relationship. That gives us the opportunity to leverage all the capabilities that were already present in OpenEbla for rare VMs, but now for application containers. So with the additional isolation and security that involves virtualization. So that's been quite useful for edge deployments, for instance, when you want to reduce different layers and the complexity of the technology you're using for your edge deployments. Obviously, if you need Kubernetes, you can deploy that as well on top of your OpenEbla cloud, either with our CNCF certified Kubernetes appliance or with the new K3S appliance, which we find very, very handy and very useful as well for the edge. Once you have your Kubernetes clusters, you can obviously manage them with different tools, including Ranger, which is one of the integrations we run. So this is how a graphical user interface looks. This is the standard interface for admins and also for end users. And this is the new graphical user interface for the provisioning, the new provisioning tool, the one that helps you deploy infrastructure or provision infrastructure from different providers. And this is a catalog that will be expanding with different drivers for more and more cloud and edge providers in the future. So what OpenEbla creates is it's an abstraction layer on top of the complexities and the APIs of these individual providers, so you can actually deploy your workload across different providers with no additional complexities there. So this is a project we are working on right now. This is a project from the Horizon 2020 program that we started in November 2019, and it's going to be running till March next year. And this is how we are expanding OpenEbla from the private cloud beyond the data center. And we are turning OpenEbla into an open source, the first European open source edge computing platform, all thanks to obviously the support from the Commission. So why edge computing? So why turning a solution for the private cloud into an edge computing one? Well, when we proposed this project to the Commission a few years ago, we had already realized that edge computing was actually going to become a thing. So not just a buzzword, as we've seen sometimes, but actually something, a technology and a new paradigm that was going to to bring a deep disruption to the cloud market. Disruption in the sense that it's going to change the way users interact with the cloud, but the expectations they have from the cloud, but also the way in which the ecosystem, the cloud ecosystem, and the cloud provider ecosystem works now and is organized now. So that's what we thought was, after several years working on OpenEbla as a private cloud solution, we thought it was absolutely worth it doing this transition and this evolution of the product into an open source edge computing platform as well. So edge computing brings a number of benefits, and it's going to bring some major benefits to users and companies in different sectors. I mean, in all different sectors in which we operate now, we see the application of edge computing in the near future. Things like the deployment of low latency or ultra low latency applications, very close to the end user or the IoT device or the mobile device. Things like improving the user experience in some sectors. This is crucial. Things like gaming, for instance, or smart health. That's going to be really important. Expanding service availability, so being able to deploy a cloud that can actually leverage different infrastructure resources and adapt to that deployment depending on what's going on with that infrastructure and possible incidents. We're talking about reducing data transfers and the security risks involved in that, and also the energy consumption involved in data transfers. We're talking about, for companies mainly in Europe, we think it's going to bring a tool for minimizing their dependency on some vendors, and specifically on some hyperscalers. And at the same time, it's going to help Europe develop its own local ecosystem of infrastructure providers, mainly with new edge providers. In that way, strengthening, we think, the EU digital sovereignty. We are seeing already some of these elements happening, specifically at the 5G market, and they bring some interesting lessons, and I think it's worth analyzing that for a second. So what we've seen recently in the past few months is an increasingly aggressive strategy by hyperscalers to position themselves in Europe specifically, but also in other places, as edge providers. So reaching agreements in this way with telecommunication companies and using 5G providers' infrastructures and networks to offer these edge computing services to their customers. I think it was yesterday that AWS and Vodafone officially launched their AWS wavelength program in the UK. It had been announced a few months ago, but they had this formal announcement yesterday. And this is the model we see in some other operators as well in the telecommunications sector. So hyperscalers placing the physical infrastructure within the 5G networks and the facilities of the operators, and using their traditional portals and tools for customers to use these new resources at the 5G edge. That comes with some pros and cons. I mean, it's a very quick way to deploy edge resources and make them available for customers, but there's a risk as well. So these companies are actually running some risks here in terms of they might end up becoming a provider of connectivity and facilities for hyperscalers, and that's something that's not owning the edge in that sense also comes with a potential risk for them in the midterm. But let's see what happens. Our perspective is more in line with what the European Commission has been declaring lately, that as edge computing becomes a reality, Europe specifically needs to strengthen its technological capabilities and develop its technological sovereignty, and reevaluate the impact and the dependency on non-EU technologies and providers like typically hyperscalers. And we obviously agree with the statement that open source can actually help to do this. So that's why we are developing a European open source technology, and the idea is for this technology to empower the cloud and edge ecosystem in Europe. What we see as a very interesting and very something with a high impact, potential for high impact, is the latest announcement by the European Commission of their 2030 Digital Compass, and specifically the target of having this 10,000 climate-neutral, highly secure edge nodes deployed across the continent by 2030. So that's a lot of metal. And this is going to need a commitment from telecommunication operators, a commitment by investors and cloud providers to expand their infrastructure and offer new infrastructure at the edge in a seamless way. In this, we also think we can help, and GAIA-X is going to help as well in making this possible, more accessible to both providers and consumers of this technology, and also going towards that objective to decrease Europe's dependency on critical non-EU technologies. There are a number of initiatives now in Europe, apart from GAIA-X, which I'll get into more detail in a second, and also the new Horizon Europe calls. There's also the IPSAI, the Important Project of Common European Interest, of the cloud and infrastructure and services sector. And this is a project that's been led by Germany and France and involves a number of EU member states, in which we are really happy to see that there is an explicit commitment to develop European open source technologies and create and support the development of technologies that can actually manage workloads and combine infrastructures across the whole cloud edge continuum, which for us is kind of a natural next step, coming from the data center, reaching to the public cloud, and then to the edge and the IoT level. So how we think GAIA-X is going to do that, how we are planning to support this. Well, as you know, GAIA-X is a European initiative, or pan-European initiative, announced back in 2019 by the German and French government. We joined the project in March 2020. The community has been increasing almost exponentially since the GAIA-X association was created in late 2020. We've seen a number of corporate members and research associations and providers joining the project. So we're really happy to see that this is gaining momentum now. Also, it's getting support from different EU member states, and now it's becoming something that's not just promoted by the German and French governments, but also it's getting its own autonomy in that sense and its own inertia in terms of putting and defining new challenges and new objectives, and how the implementation of the whole platform is going to take place in the end. So the GAIA-X project is based on this idea that Europe needs to improve its technological sovereignty. Like the cloud is going to be a major element for this, and GAIA-X is a tool that's going to allow different companies and agents in the ecosystem to come together and develop together a solution. And that's going to be beneficial for different sectors. We're talking here about combining infrastructure providers, for instance, with data and services. So breaking down the de facto stack that hyperscalers provide, because they provide their infrastructure, they provide data, and they provide their own services. So breaking down that stack into different elements and different companies being able to provide these resources separately. And for the user and for companies using this service to be able, in a federated way, to use this infrastructure, these services, and this data with a number of resources and catalogs, and following and respecting a number of rules and legal requirements. So GDPR, for instance, is an important one, but also things like identity, trust management, being able to access these resources in a federated way, not only from a centralized place, and for companies and providers to be able to offer these resources in a flexible way through their self-description and policies that are open to discussion and open source when possible, and open standards as well. So it's a really nice project, and we think it's perfect at this stage for Europe, at least to start thinking about a common position and how to collaborate even between and among competitors, how to collaborate to define a common platform that they can all benefit from. We also think that GAIA-X, in that sense, is going to help achieve the European Commission's objectives to have Europe's next generation edge cloud as something that can actually support the deployment of infrastructure and applications across, as I mentioned, this continuum, the cloud edge continuum, which for us also involves the core data center. So as we come from the private cloud, we also understand that organizations that want to leverage the new edge computing resources that are going to be available, they will also need to manage the workloads and the infrastructure that they keep on premises. So what we see now is coming back, let's say, from the public cloud after several years of heavy investment in marketing by hyperscalers, that everything could be run on their cloud. Now what we see is a movement in the other way. So companies realizing and governments realizing that part of the data and technological sovereignty also involves to retain control of some of the infrastructure that they need and the data that they need, and have that data and those resources on premises. So physically located in their facilities, and in this case, being able to deploy a multi-cloud environment and use resources from providers in different locations, not just big data centers, but also smaller data centers closer to the users and customers, but also things like IoT devices, or what we call the far edge. So infrastructure resources on board of trains and other transportation means. From our perspective, what we think is that Europe has many capabilities already in place. So there are a number of technologies that can be crucial to do this. And part of our projects to integrate OpenNebula with GAIA-X go through that. So that process. So they will be based on leveraging and integrating and improving our support for other European open source technologies like those you see there, and also using the open source technology that GAIA-X itself is going to develop as part of the GAIA-X federated services that are already being developed now. Well, if you want some more information on this specific approach and how to use European open source for this, and what each of these vendors is doing in terms of adapting to the edge revolution, just a quick invitation here for you to watch this webinar we had a few weeks ago with Limbit, MariaDB, and SUSE. So our specific integration with GAIA-X is basically going to happen through our provider catalog that I already mentioned. So for us, the model is having an OpenEbla instance that opens up a world of possibilities for users in terms of leveraging and providing provisioning resources from different providers. That happens through the catalog. So one of the objectives of GAIA-X is going to be to put in place a federated catalog of these resources. So for us, the integration is almost immediate once the APIs are ready. So for our users to be able to provision the resources that are being offered through the GAIA-X catalog, integrate that into our catalog, and then for our users to, as they will do on any other provider, just to deploy the VMs or application containers or Kubernetes clusters on the infrastructure that comes through the GAIA-X portal. The use cases we see there, almost immediate application for a number of corporate users in the sectors to leverage those resources that are going to be offered by GAIA-X providers through the GAIA-X Federation services, especially the catalog, but also things like identity and trust and the monitoring that you need to make sure that the resources deliver what they promise. So for users and customers that have already an OpenEbla instance on premises, as they will do with any other third-party provider, they will be able to access those GAIA-X providers. And we also see new business cases here, like for some providers to create sector-specific portals with a subset of GAIA-X providers and GAIA-X services for specific customers with their own edge applications to be ready to be deployed, public or private marketplaces. And this is also a model that we see. We think it has a lot of potential to create these new business models based on a specific subset of GAIA-X for specific sectors. So again, that's the main two use cases that we're planning to implement as part of our integration with GAIA-X. So expanding your enterprise cloud based on OpenEbla to the edge using the cloud and edge resources offered by GAIA-X providers for running VMs and applications, and a sort of GAIA-X as a service using a subset of resources from GAIA-X through a hosted instance of OpenEbla offered by a new provider to include a curated subset of resources and access to private marketplaces to deploy specific applications for specific sectors. So through GAIA-X, we think it's going to be. I mean, GAIA-X is going to speed up the implementation of Europe's next generation edge cloud. We think, and it all seems to indicate that it is going to be based on open source technologies, and we think that's a marvelous idea. I think we all are hoping that GAIA-X and other initiatives will see a stronger commitment by the European industry, which is not always that familiar with what open source means. So there is, I think, one of the challenges is probably a change in the mindset of many of the companies in Europe who are not used to collaborate with their competitors in creating something and maintaining something together. But we think GAIA-X, through an open source model, can actually achieve that, can be a tool for changing the mindsets of the EU industry. So we're hoping to see a commitment from integrators and research organizations, obviously, cloud and edge providers in Europe, hardware manufacturers as well. 5G providers is an important element there, and telecommunication companies. Beyond those agreements, they're reaching now with hyperscalers, and obviously an important element here is going to be public, but also private investment in the new edge infrastructure that Europe needs. With all these elements, I think we are going to be able, thanks to the open source model, we're going to be able to build a European cloud and edge ecosystem, a strong one across the continent and around the open platforms like GAIA-X. We have been able to identify use cases that have a high impact and are going to be key applications for many sectors. to mobilize Europe's very strong and powerful research and development and technological capabilities and the innovation that's taking place, and open up new businesses and new spaces for collaboration for companies in Europe. So here you have more resources. If you want to look at read more details about our approach, you're very welcome. And obviously, you are very welcome to have a look at OpenEbla, try it, and let us know what you think about the new technology we are developing. And well, I think that's been all from my side. Thank you all in advance for your questions, and see you at the chat.